This is the Leadership and Insurance podcast, brought to you by FinPro Search Partners.
Insurance companies are businesses and they need to look for the long term and be sustainable.
We went from 0 to 1 and now it's going from 1 to 100.
Insurance as a concept, as a kind of service, is brilliant. The execution is what we're looking at now. I think the companies that are going to succeed are the ones that are going to understand and master the art of intent. When we talk about innovation, we lean too heavily to think about technology and we don't think about creating a culture of innovation. I think innovation is essentially continuous improvement of existing processes and platforms and product.
Right? It's got to be easy. It's got to be seamless.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Emerging Tech series of the Leadership and Insurance podcast. I'm your host, Gavin Savage, and on this podcast today, I'm very lucky to be joined by co-founder and CTO Dan from Ideon. Dan, welcome.
Hey, Gavin, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Dan, before we get into talking all things API and the origin of Ideon, the health and benefits sector and everything else, always a nice place to start if you could introduce yourself, even pre-Ideon, but as a whole, how you got into tech and how you ended up founding an insurtech in Ideon.
Sure. So going way back, and when I was a kid, I was always into computers. Built some websites and things in high school, but actually decided to study psychology, organizational psychology in college. So when I came out of college, started working for a small management consulting firm. And part of what they did was some technology delivery as well. So got sort of re-exposed there. And through a series of other jobs, ultimately found myself in a position where I could decide, do I really want to become a software engineer or continue with what I was doing before, and made the leap into software engineering and found that I just took to it really quickly, even though I hadn't had as much formal background. So fast forward a couple of years, I joined a very early stage as a co-founder of a company called LifeBooker, which is a technology platform for the health and beauty space, primarily around a marketplace for local services. So think of a Priceline or a Expedia type thing for booking local services with the airline pricing model. So you would discount dynamically. And did that for a number of years, had some success, grew that company to about 100 people and about a little shy of 10 million in revenue, but ultimately decided to move on from there. And through one of my co-founders there, was introduced to my co-founder at Ideon. At the time, we were really focused on provider data, so healthcare providers, which ones are in and out of network. And we founded the company as Vericred, which verifying credentials. So the vision there was to build a single credentialing company, single API for provider credentials. We ultimately didn't end up fully pursuing that because we found the need for the healthcare data around provider network and participation to be really compelling, and sort of the tip of the iceberg in the data problem in the insurtech space in general, specifically around health and benefits. So as we started to sell that into the market, we just got a lot of feedback saying this is really useful. Can you do other stuff? Can you get plans? Can you manage eligibility? So doing member enrollment at the carrier, and ultimately really solving for the fact that most insurance carriers, while they were early adopters of technology, have not really kept up with the sort of modern development practices, and so have some tech debt, and so don't really have the API connectivity that a lot of the startups in the space would hope for or are looking for. And that's really the role that Ideon fills.
Awesome, thank you. It's interesting going way back to you said you kind of almost fell into software. You never studied computer science, and I always find it interesting. Aside from podcasting, we're a recruitment firm, and when I'm asked to look for engineers, that that focus on having degrees in computer science is so high on the grading system of what they will accept in terms of speaking to people. But it just goes to show, some of the brightest and best engineers don't always have to have studied computer science or a relevant degree at university. It's just interesting kind of rise to that. And why was the appreciate at Lifebooker there was that health domain focus there, but why was this the company that you wanted to then build with your co-founder in the health and benefits space? Was it simply to utilize the knowledge gained at Lifebooker, or was there a kind of bigger why for you and your co-founder?
So I would say less, at least my initial interest was less on the health and benefits space specifically, and more on the sort of modernization piece of helping to bring this data accessibility to the market for a really important problem, but taking what was like really hard for other companies to work with from an API perspective and making it a lot easier for them. So that's sort of how I, you know, approached it. Over time, obviously, having that connection to people's healthcare and to people's benefits and so we're the types of policies that we're helping people to purchase and to
Mm,
use and manage are, health and their dental and vision. Also, some of their voluntary products like accident, critical illness, disability, life insurance, those sorts of things at the group level. So that is one thing that we think a lot about is the importance of the work that we're doing in making sure that data is correct so that you don't get a person who has an injury and then isn't covered when they expected to, or someone who passes away and their family doesn't get the coverage that they had expected to. So this is something that we think about a lot, and that it keeps me really focused on this problem space.
mm. And you kind of mentioned the carriers there. They have a lot as a carrier to consider across the health space. More and more carriers, yes, have seized that opportunity to adopt things like cloud solutions and SaaS solutions, and of course the adoption of API development to support that fast and interchangeable, accurate data.
Mhm.
And of course, at Ideon, that's what the whole, a large proportion is built upon that a really great API solution. The status quo, I'm always in my kind of geek brain is always thinking, where are we with kind of APIs at the moment? I have that conversation a lot with those in the space in terms of, the status quo is very much EDIs are still very much prominent and there's, by and large, the majority stakeholder if you're going to compare the two. But, where do you see someone that's so embedded with insurance carriers and APIs as a whole? Where do you see the kind of future of API development going? Like, do you envision a world where they fully replace EDIs, or do they have to live? We met in New York a few months back. We kind of scratched the surface on this, but just kind of keen to get your thoughts on where you see the future of this space going.
Yeah, so the challenge with most insurance carriers, really all of the insurance carriers that we work with, are the majority of the major ones,
Mm,
is that their back-end systems are not real-time systems. So, and this is true of a lot of enterprise architecture, but it's especially true in the insurance space. And so what that means is they're built to assume that we're doing a batch process to load things. And typically their first foray into public facing APIs, because they'll have APIs internally to go
mm,
between system to system, but their first foray into public APIs will really be to put some kind of enterprise message bus in front of their legacy system, because that legacy system was developed over many, many years. It has all kinds of rules in it, and they may or may not be fully understood within the insurance carrier. And so just ripping that out and replacing it is very, very risky, and it's not something that they want to do or that they should do, really. So
mm,
what they're doing is sort of taking almost their APIs first pass at it is almost taking each line of the EDI file one at a time almost and reading it in, or each person kind of one at a time and reading it in. And so the challenge with that is that those are all processed asynchronously, which means that there's not really, when they say real time, there's not really a way to do real time in that it doesn't commit to a database and respond from an API the way that you might expect it to.
Mm.
So for that to be fully solved for, it's really the insurance carriers will need to modernize their infrastructure, and we are talking with a lot of the major, largest insurance carriers, and also some kind of up and comers who are building technology from the ground up. And there's actually been a lot of movement in that direction over the last, say, 2 to 3 years. That before, if you go back a few years before that, there was a lot of people were really talking about, oh, we're going to build APIs, but really not paying a whole lot of attention to their internal data management process. And now there's been a lot of focus on that data management process. So I believe that over time that, the carriers really will solve for that. It will take, it's not a short-term solution. It will take a lot of time for that to work its way through. In the meantime, we can accomplish many of the same things that we do via API in sending EDI files. So the way that we do that at Ideon is through audit processes. So we'll send over an EDI file, which, when you think about it, is not all that different from sending over an API request, with the major exception being that you don't get back a response to say, hey, this passed the basic validation and is queued for processing. That's effectively what the API does for us with these insurance carriers. So what we do then is we actually work with the carriers for them to expose a census, so the list of the population, all of their plan codes, all of their amounts, if it's a volume based. So, a disability would have an amount, that sort of thing. And then we do an audit against that. So we're able to say, well, these 10 members went through correctly and they match what we expect, but this 11th member, well, there's a discrepancy between that member's data as we sent it and what you're reporting back. And we're able to surface those kind of discrepancies. So all that to say, we're able to actually produce a lot of those experiences that you would expect via our APIs, even if it's EDI on the back end. And to directly answer your question, I think that EDI will be here for a long time. It is current. Recently, we did a study with LIMRA where we found that EDI is the most common way to send file data, which was not surprising. But we also found that paper is more. There are more people using paper than there are using APIs, which was a little bit surprising to us.
It's a little bit terrifying. And the thing about you guys at Ideon, it's not you. Yes, large proportion is you work with carriers, but you also work with insurtechs, and these insurtechs, this age of insurtechs that are disrupting the CX, the customer experience. The carriers that are, I guess what we're trying to say, the carriers that are, can manage frequency and severity and prediction and really relative, well, I guess, to predictive ratings, the insurance side of things, cutting costs and making competitive policies. But, when you look at, as you mentioned, their real-time connectivity between insurance carriers has been difficult, and APIs is helping that. Like, what do you think the incumbents? Because on the insurance side, that's where insurtechs, I think, sometimes from having people on the podcast and being in the space, it seems that maybe underestimate how difficult that insurance side of it is. But they can create, because they don't have any desperate third-party systems, they don't have any technical debt, and they have the kind of latest and greatest tech. That customer experience side is much easier for them to build upon. What do you think incumbents need to do to move faster to improve the customer experience side of what they're doing? Because they've clearly been, in the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, woken up by the disruptors. But as someone that works with carriers every other day, like, what are you seeing in terms of that aspect of how they can get there quicker?
So it's not an easy problem to solve because there's debt that's many, many years old. And a lot of times it's just a decision that somebody made a long time ago to build this policy admin as a separate system, and it's really hard to unwind. Or they purchased another insurance carrier and they never fully integrated them technically. Maybe they integrated the products, but they didn't integrate the technology behind the scenes. So as I said before, we're really seeing a lot of the major carriers start to make those investments, and we're seeing big commitments in terms of dollars and people
Mm.
into upgrading those legacy systems. We're also seeing, a number of players in the policy admin space. These are SaaS providers who are selling policy admin software to carriers, and they're effectively, moving everything over into these new SaaS systems. And there are a number of those that we've seen having quite a bit of success. So there's definitely a move in that direction, but there's not a silver bullet, so to speak. And I agree with you that as a startup, you assume that, well, it's really easy. Why don't they just use the tech stack that we have? But they have, it's built on top of a lot of them are running DB2, COBOL, like
Yeah.
from systems that were designed in the 80s and 90s. And like I was saying before, there are big parts of those systems that everybody who actually implemented them and worked on them is no longer at the carrier, and maybe they weren't documented. So it does a whole lot of things that they don't necessarily know what all of them are. So it's pretty risky to just sort of say, well, we're just going to scratch this and start over, and we'll build it on AWS with like a in Python, and we'll Postgres, and we'll redo it all from scratch. That's not a really viable option for a carrier to do, because the business risk is just really large.
Mm. And like, do you ever envision a state, you've touched on the low codes, the policy admin systems that can be plugged in and can transfer, but I'm assuming that's I don't know how long that process is. It surely must take years, but do you think is there another way that you're kind of seeing where you feel like there's a better way, or basically a way where they almost can feel like they can start from scratch and really focus on, we've nailed the insurance part, we're a multi-billion dollar company. Let's really take the customer experience up a notch, that give them the autonomy to really innovate and disrupt as a carrier, as opposed to talking about insurtechs disrupting, which is the obvious thing. Like,
Mhm.
apart from the kind of low no code plugins, are you kind of seeing anything else that's quite interesting on your side?
So I think the challenge, and I think that you'll see this as these newer players that have entered the market scale up as well, is that because of the distribution channel, which is through brokers primarily, and I at least personally believe that that will continue to be the case. There are a lot of people who, especially 5 or 10 years ago, were saying brokers are going to just disappear, and that hasn't
Mm.
happened. If anything, it's become more important.
Yeah.
Because of that, and because of I would say, sort of the culture of insurance carriers, it's a very sales-driven culture, in
Yeah.
many areas at least. And so what ends up happening then is they sell policies that have a lot of complexity in them, right? And they sort of will, a lot of times, will sell whatever they can come up with that makes the client happy and gives them. So from that perspective, they actually are really prioritizing customer experience, because they're selling you a very customized policy. It's exactly what you want. The problem is that they don't have a system that can actually implement that policy. So then they have to put a bunch of band-aids on the existing system, and that really exacerbates the problem. So I think, it sounds good on paper to say, well, what we'll do is we'll just make a lot of really simple policies. We'll have like a really streamlined system. Everything will work perfectly. We won't make any exceptions. But I just don't think that recognizes the reality of how insurance is actually sold through the broker channel. And I
Yeah.
think that strategy will work to a point. But once you start getting to these big employers, they say, well, I'm going to switch from, if I'm going to switch from one of these large carriers over to you, well, I need to have a policy that does exactly what I want. It needs to be broken up this way, and like all of this complexity. It's pretty hard to say no to that, right? So they'll end
Mm.
up, I believe, probably falling into this same pattern.
Mm. And I think that's inherently why it's so different and difficult to innovate in insurance as opposed to financial services or banking, fintech.
Mhm.
We've seen that spillover of, fintech entrepreneurs and founders that have entered into the insurtech where it's just not quite been as maybe successful for them as they would have hoped. And,
Mhm.
when the insurance industry, certainly in the UK, but as a global industry, when they became regulated, it was all at the core of the regulations. It's about, when we take it back to there's a few values there, but treating the customer fairly, the consumer digital legislation came in the UK, and again globally, it was about acting in good faith and avoiding uh, serious harm. Now, I think that, again, that all points back to customer experience, and we've spoken about the challenges that carriers have and continue to experience, but clearly there's a lot of positivity and reasons to be excited. But for Ideon, what's been, and I guess for other players, I know you guys have, really quite dominating in the space that you're in, so there's not many that are entering your direct space, but those coming in with that type of solution to the insurance industry, I think it's an interesting insight as to what's the biggest challenges for you and the team when you're working with these carriers and you're looking to innovate for efficiency and connectivity, maybe not specifically in health insurance, but again, I think that interesting insight about what have been the main challenges for you guys over the years would be cool.
So anytime that you're working with insurance carriers, like just getting their attention and establishing credibility is really difficult. The sales cycles are very long. They are by nature, understandably, risk-averse organizations. They don't want to try out the new thing and be the first one to try it. It's like nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. Like that's very much the culture. So that, from a sales perspective, was challenging getting started. Just we needed to get their attention. I think that as we've gone forward, some of the things I was talking about earlier, where there's just a lot of complexity in their ecosystem because of the way that the policies are structured, or because I'll give you a couple of examples. We have some partners where they have certain group sizes are on one policy admin, right? So this is when we're sending eligibility. So if you're a group, maybe you have 100 people in your company, right? If you're 100 people, that goes to System A. But if you're 500 people, that goes to System B. And then if you have a disability product, well, the disability product needs to go over to System C, but your data might still go to Systems A or B, depending on how many people you have for the rest of the policies. So there's a lot of complexity kind of behind the scenes there. And a lot of our role is actually abstracting that complexity away, because you as the Ben admin don't want to know about systems A, B, and C. Ideally, you'd like to just be able to send the data to one
Yeah.
place and have it get figured out and sorted into the right buckets and so on. So that's actually the role that we play. So while it is challenging, it also is a lot of the value that we provide. So it ends up net positive for us.
Hmm. You mentioned, it's difficult to get their attention in this very, I mean, carriers have literally thousands of systems, different systems that are talking to each other, thousands of people trying to approach them to offer them a better solution. What do you feel like in this current market within kind of low code API development? What do you think it takes to stand out? Do you have to include AI in your strategy? Like, what do you feel like is a way of standing out nowadays and getting the attention of carriers? Like, what are they looking for at the moment?
So it depends on what specifically you're doing. One of the things that's challenging in carriers is actually finding the right person at the carrier, because a lot of them have different titles for different sorts of functions, and it's a little bit hard to actually identify the right person. The things that
Mm,
have been most successful for us, one is working those relationships and working the org chart within the carrier to find the right person who is responsible for things related to us. It's also a very relationship-driven business. So a lot of our, partners at one carrier will move to another carrier, and then that gets us, a kind of foot in the door at the second carrier. So really establishing relationships with people within the carriers. Within our sales team, we have a ton of experience in the carrier space and in the Ben admin space. So those
yeah,
relationships are actually really important. And if you're building a company, the insurance space, I think, is not, as with probably a lot of spaces, are not super excited for people who don't know anything about insurance to come in and tell them how they should run their business. So they're pretty sensitive to that, and understandably so, because it's not as easy as you might think as a technology person coming in.
yeah.
So having that kind of credibility and having some people on your team who really understand the space, can speak to all of the different challenges, it really helps, goes a long way once you start getting those conversations with carriers.
Hmm. Interesting. Interesting. And kind of to go back to what you said just before that about, carrier, the challenges are very risk averse and it's getting the attention. Do you feel like they prioritize one thing over the other? One thing I wanted to ask in terms of innovation, you know, the many conversations that you have and the many partnerships that you have, like, do you feel like innovation is as important as keeping up with regulation for the carriers, or do you think companies have to prioritize one or the other, or are you starting to see that in a more balanced view, innovation and regulation?
Yeah. I think it's become more balanced over time. I think by nature, like I was saying before, carriers, they're risk averse and they see, I would say on balance, they value saving a dollar over making a dollar, de-risking over innovation. So I think that is understandably the culture that tends to be the case. I do think that there has been a lot of investment in especially many of the carriers that we're working with on innovative type of initiatives where they are looking out to say, like, all right, well, how can we provide a better user experience across the market? How can we be the easiest carrier to do business with? Which is, I think, really great and good for the consumer, good for the space in general. But I think if you use the vitamin versus painkiller, the painkiller for the carrier is usually something that mitigates risk.
Hmm, interesting. And I was kind of wanting to speak to you before around the kind of culture at Ideon. I think you've kind of gave us an insight there into what's been successful for you guys having that insurance domain knowledge. But before we get into that, I was keen again, maybe not even related to health and benefits, but maybe what you're seeing from just the general, what are you generally excited about in terms of, any technology innovation? Is there anything that's, last year a buzzword of 2023 was, of course, AI. It will continue to be this year. But is there anything that you personally are kind of generally excited about from a tech innovation standpoint right now? Or maybe it is specific to health and benefits. I don't know.
Sure. So I think, and there's a lot of really interesting and exciting stuff going on with AI. I think the generative AI has sort of put it into in the forefront of people's minds, but there's been a lot of interesting AI
Mm.
development, long in advance at ML, long in
Yep.
advance of that, which is, foundational for the Gen AI stuff. So we actually have invested a fair amount in our AI capability and some ML capability around specifically looking at doctors who are in network, looking at their locations, which insurance they accept, and using machine learning to predict, how likely it is that data that's given to us or that we find on the internet is correct or not. That's actually proven to be really successful and valuable. In terms of the Gen AI stuff, um, there are not a lot as many places in our business where non-deterministic type behavior, so like probabilistic, meaning if you give give some data into the algorithm, it will not necessarily give you the exact same result every time or the exact predicted result every time. That's actually generally kind of a bad thing for a lot of what we do, where if you send me a person who's going to be enrolled, like you want to be enrolled 100% of the time, not 99.8% of the time, right? So there's a little bit less applicability within the product for us. Where we're using generative AI quite a bit is on the business side to summarize documents for us to start to write the outline of a deck that we then fill in. Because we have a lot of people on the team who are using it that way, but less so sort of in the product for us directly.
Mm. Yeah, I think generative AI and large language models as a whole are two very different things. And large language models I think for me anyway, I've said it before, I do think they will be the thing that really continues to transform the insurance space. But of course, I do think generative AI has its very quick advantages to what you've just highlighted there in terms of doing some heavy lifting from tasks that can take hours into, well, probably minutes, seconds.
Mhm.
But from a kind of cultural perspective, I was interested to jump in before we finish up, Dan, and the culture that you've managed to build. First of all, you've built the business over the last many years, up to I think just over hundreds. The culture at Ideon seems one that is talked about a lot, from reading online and just generally it just looks and feels like a fantastic place to work. Like, what do you think? How do you define what is culture to you? And I think what did you prioritize in the early days and manage to still, prioritize now as you scale to that kind of 100 plus mark, which is what a lot of companies always try and achieve.
Yeah, I think that in terms of culture and the way that you cultivate a good culture, it changes pretty significantly as your organization grows. And the tools and the strategies that you need in order to maintain your culture are pretty different from when you're five versus 25, 30 versus 50 versus 100. Like those start to change pretty
Mm.
significantly. I think the main thing to me that defines a good culture is for people to feel like they have uh, some autonomy and the ability to make impact. And so that's something that we've always really prioritized in giving people clear goals, helping them to understand how what they're doing impacts the overall success of Ideon, of business in general. And then giving them enough autonomy in how they approach their day to day that they feel like they're able to really make an impact. So that's sort of the guiding principle. There's a lot of ways that you can do that, and it's a little bit probably different for every company. But I think that's the guiding principle that really is generally true across really any organization.
It's just interesting when you talk about that autonomy, that ability to make an impact, and almost, yeah, definitely creating that, element of psychological safety to still be autonomous and make that impact. But when you get to, I've been involved in it before, a business that's 10 in size that goes to 100 over 2, 3 year, I think for me, my experience was you lose that autonomy and it becomes more, I guess, do as we say to a degree. Like again, you've clearly maintained that culture of autonomy and creativity and ability to make an impact, even at this later kind of larger scale, which is super impressive.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the strategies that's worked really well for us is maintaining some level of cross-functional teams. So having our ops team work very closely with product, work closely with engineering, have sales involved there, so that there's feedback loops within kind of smaller groups, and allowing where we've, I think, had less success is when things tend to be more siloed, where there's like the product department, and then they throw it over the wall the engineering department. So that's something that we consciously try to avoid, and has really helped as we've scaled up in terms of number of people on the team.
Hmm. And what's final question? What's next for you and the team at Ideon? I mean, it seems like it's been the last couple of years changing brand and maybe a bit of a restructure, but now you're pushing on. Like, what is the kind of future and vision for you guys? What are you excited about for the company?
Yeah, there's a lot of greenfield in what we're doing now. So I think from a product development perspective, it's really about continuing on with the current mission, to build connectivity across really a broad set of insurance use cases for the health and benefit space. And we're seeing continued signs that that's needed and wanted, and we have more and more customers signing up, asking us to do more things, better things. And so there's really a ton of demand, which is super exciting. So I don't think that there is a big change in strategy or anything like that. It's really just continuing to do what we do better and better, and to solve the ultimate problem that we set out to.
Awesome. Love it. Well, look, good luck with the year, Dan. And thank you for coming on the show. It's been great to have you on.
All right. Thanks. It's been great to be here.